We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. It is Wednesday. A lot of shit happening this week. A lot of shit happened last week. It's going to be like this through November of 2024 between lawsuits, criminal trials, speakers of the House, international wars. It seems like every day there is an absolute shit show of activity. I was talking to Jace from Texas. He's going to be on an upcoming show. And I said, it seems like we're at a point when everything is getting so bad that there's really no other way to go after this than to get better. And I sense that change. I almost feel like it's destiny that it will get better. We've had other eras in this country, like the 60s, when it was, believe it or not, just as bad. And then we got to the 70s and things got a lot better. So I know a lot of people are concerned and worried. And as I've told you before, don't worry about things you can't control. Just do what you can control. Do it to the best of your ability and trust that good will win out. And I think that's what's going to happen. I have to believe that. Anyhow, we're going to get to getting here on the Rational Boomer podcast. As I've told you before, I'm going to Portland, Maine on Thursday. We'll come back Sunday. It's my wedding anniversary on the 14th of October. My wife and I will have been married 40 years. Believe that or fucking not. And we're going to have a good time out there and spend some time together. And we travel a lot together. We hang out together a lot. I think for me anyway, she's the one person that can tolerate me for an extended period of time, mainly because she has to, but she's able to, she's gotten used to me, put it that way. So let's get to the show. And we've got some emails to check in. This first one comes from Trevor. He's been on the show before. Dear Mike, I was talking to my church friend over the phone, and he told me that there are babies decapitated and women laying on the ground dead. I've been staying up to date with everything that's going on in overseas and Islam and the horrors behind this fucking war. Good going, Matt Gaetz, for voting to take your boyfriend, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, out and not having a fucking replacement to take his place, let alone your dumbass Republicans don't give a living fuck about what's happening to victims and children over in Gaza, and how the children are being held hostage without being rescued by their parents or an army of some sort. Don't they realize that they are committing acts of war crimes, multiple counts of murder and manslaughter? I don't care that Trump is having the worst year of his miserable life in court because he fucking deserves it. And also, he's too pussy about going to jail. I watched Cassidy Hutchinson when she was speaking with Jimmy Kimmel on live TV, and she told Jimmy that Trump is too afraid to get injected with poison. Ha ha ha. I was laughing with an evil laugh in my mind while watching this. I truly believe that Mike, that Hakeem Jeffries should be elected as the next Speaker of the House because he's more qualified to do the job, and he will make a huge embarrassment out of the Republicans. Jasmine Crockett absolutely destroyed the Republicans when they tried to come up with the evidence to impeach sitting President Joe Biden. But on top of that, they had no witnesses. They were invited to testify about why POTUS Joe Biden should be impeached. I'm open to be on Rational Boomer show anytime. Mike. Trevor. And Trevor gives a PS. P.S. I enjoy listening and watching the Rational Boomer shows when Old Soul is on the show, or Ed, and hearing their point of view on what's happening around the country. I have to give my hats off to Old Soul, and she is helping women all over the country who want an abortion or dealing with other issues. Yeah, Old Soul is one of those people. A lot of people talk the talk, but Old Soul walks the walk. And I'm impressed by her every time I talk to her, not only because she's articulate and because she has some good insights, but she's actually doing something every day to help other people. And that's a big deal. Not too many people are in a position to do that or are willing to do that, but she is. And you got to give her the utmost of respect for that. I appreciate the email, Trevor. And I agree with you that Hakeem Jeffries would probably be a better Speaker of the House than Kevin McCarthy or any of the other fucks. But I wouldn't get your hopes up. I don't see the Republicans bending and putting a Democrat in the Speaker of the House. At best case, they're going to talk to the Democrats to try to get some more moderate Republican to be the Speaker of the House. But I think because time is of the essence here, because of the war in Israel and Gaza, the war in the Ukraine, and having to get a budget figured out over the next 30 days, I think they're going to try to go with the quickest answer. And as I said, a week or so back, I wouldn't be surprised if they put Kevin McCarthy back in the position. That makes the most sense because 95% of the Republicans didn't want to kick him out. It was just 8 people that booted him. And you're not going to have to put somebody in the speaker's job and give them a ramp up time to know what the fuck they're doing. Kevin McCarthy is going to be the logical choice in there. It'll be the one chance where the Republicans can finally marginalize these Trump-la-fucks if they're daring enough to do it. But that seems to me to be the quickest thing that they can do. The important thing to understand, though, is they're going to have to deal with the Democrats. They are going to need the Democrats' help. So if the Democrats have the wherewithal, before they agree to do something like that, at the very least, I would have them sit down and say, okay, we'll help you. We'll put Kevin McCarthy back in so you don't look any more foolish than you already do. However, if we're going to do that, we got to get this deal for the budget cut now. Now. We're not going to wait 30 days and worry everybody about shutting down the country. Get that fucker done now, then we'll vote for Kevin McCarthy and we'll handle the rest of the things. I hope they do that. That would be the play if you're in the position with the Democrats. The ironic thing, though, is the Republicans are alleged to have the majority in the House, but it really seems like the Democrats have all the power. They're the ones making the decision. We're going to see what's going to happen. And today is the first day they're getting together to discuss this situation. It's going to be interesting to see how quickly they can make things happen. They really fucked up when they kicked McCarthy out of the position. But when that Hamas Israeli thing started, that really put the pressure on them. They look really bad right now. So they're going to want to fix it as quickly as possible. Again, thank you, Trevor, for the email. Now, the next email comes to us. Funny, we were just talking about her. This one comes from Old Soul. She says, hey, Boomer, on the podcast last night, you asked what Trump means when he calls Letitia James peekaboo. It's a commonly used word by the white supremacist. It's extremely racist. He's substituting the slur jigaboo with peekaboo. He's using coded language just like that when he calls us predators, animals, and rabid. Honestly, Old Soul, I'm old enough and grew up in an era when there was a lot of racism, and that was my guess. I just didn't imagine that Donald Trump would be that flagrant and that obvious with it. Now, I guess that's crazy to say, but I wasn't sure if there was some other thing that he could suggest it was about other than that. It doesn't surprise me, but fucking appalling. She goes on to say, basically, he's saying we are less than human. The media lightly called him out when he initially started calling her that, but he does it so much now that they've normalized it. I don't really get upset about them not calling him out on it anymore, because if they did, they'd never have time to report on anything else. That's how often he calls us less than human. It's hurtful, and it brings tears to my eyes just writing this email. Trump is worshipped by millions of people, even though he uses these slurs during rallies, interviews, and on his social media platform. His supporters either clap, laugh, cheer, ignore it, or make excuses for him. My community can't allow ourselves to feel the way I'm feeling right now, because if we did, it would be impossible to function. Try attempting to understand why millions of Americans are going to vote for a man who openly describes Black people as less than human. I can't really describe what it feels like. It's a sad and dreadful feeling that can put you in a dark place mentally if you dwell on it. We can't just sit and think about what Trump does and says too much, because at times it can be an overwhelming feeling of hopelessness because there isn't anything we can do about it. So we just deal with it. On the third day of Trump's trial, the day he left halfway through, remember when Letitia James gave a statement to the press saying the Trump show is over? Listen to her words when she says his language has racial undertones. That's her saying he's using coded language for his base. More importantly, before she spoke, she kind of looked up towards the ceiling and took a deep breath before she spoke. She verbally kept her emotions in check, but it showed all over her face that what he was doing and saying got to her. She's a strong woman to have been able to stand there and listening to him calling her that in front of the media. I can't imagine how she felt as he stood so close to her saying that. She had to just stand there and take it as the media asked stupid questions like, what's for lunch? How do you feel about how the trial is going? Are you coming back after lunch? They even laughed at one point as some comment he made. It's got to be hurtful for her to read it online and seeing him saying it in public. But to actually have him calling her out, calling her that right in front of her and the other Black officers is next level. I don't know her, and those officers were able to conduct themselves professionally. Honestly, I don't know if I would have been able to do that. The media has normalized this blatant racist rhetoric, but my community hasn't. We'll never normalize or accept it. We just learn to live with it. Thanks, Boomer, old soul. This is something I often think about. Life for an old white guy can be tough. There are trials and tribulations and hurdles to get over, and it's difficult. I can't imagine what it would be like to have to get over all those hurdles, while at the same time, there's a faction of people that look down on you and think of you as less than human. I can't imagine that. I got to be honest, I probably wouldn't be the one to be upset about that. I mean, as it is, being on TikTok, I get plenty of people making comments or talking shit about me. And I can honestly say it really doesn't bother me. I mean, what I do on TikTok and here in the podcast, that's a show. Real life is a different situation. And that's where it's got to hurt people of color. People can hate me or not like me because of what I say on TikTok, and that's fine. I don't really care about it. But just day to day in your normal life, doing your best to try to get by like everyone else, and still there are some people that want to diminish you. That has to get tiring, debilitating. And I can't imagine what it would be like to go through something like that. We've got to change that. And the first step is to douse the rhetoric from Donald Trump and people like him. I'm hoping that when Judge Chutkan meets with the defense and the prosecution on October 16th to discuss Donald Trump's behavior and his rhetoric, that she lays down the law literally and makes him accountable and lets him know that this is not going to fucking happen anymore. I don't know if in that meeting she's going to mete out any punishment, but as I've said before in other podcasts, this should be the time where she says, listen, I've tried. I've warned you. I've treated you like an adult. There is nothing more I can do but put you in jail. I don't want to put you in jail, but just know if you continue doing what you do, it's not on me. It's on you. If she can lay that out and get at least the lawyers to understand that, maybe he will shut up. But I doubt it. I think what we need to do with Jack Smith and the judges, we need to find a way to close the mouth of Donald Trump and the members of Congress and all his little buddies. And as I've said before, the way to shut up the people in Congress, indict those motherfuckers. And I do think it's coming. We are going to see superseding indictments coming out of Jack Smith. There is no question. I was talking to Jace about this. He says, what makes you think they're going to indict members of Congress? And I'll reiterate it here, and you'll hear it on the podcast with Jace. We know there's superseding indictments coming. Jack Smith has alluded to that. We know that when it comes to the January 6th prosecution, Jack Smith has only indicted one person, that being Donald Trump. Now, he did that very specifically because he didn't want too much complexity or confusion around Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the one defendant where there is some time sensitivity. So they wanted to keep it clean and clear for Donald Trump, and they are going to prosecute him. Now, that said, there are far more people that are culpable in Washington, D.C. for January 6th. They are the buddies and hangers-on like Ginny Thomas and Roger Stone, people like that. But there are members of Congress. And we know these members of Congress were in communication with Donald Trump, with the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. Remember, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers were convicted of seditious conspiracy. They were the people, the boots on the ground. But in order for those boots on the ground to be successful, or even attempt to be successful, they needed people higher up to help coordinate, fundraise, and strategize. And those people exist. They're in Congress right now, and some outside of Congress that are friends and compatriots with Donald Trump. If you think Jack Smith is going to let them go, you're sadly mistaken. Jack Smith is pretty meticulous in doing what he's doing, and he seems to know what the fuck is up. So don't worry. I don't know when it's coming, but the sooner the better. And as I said, if we can get those indictments in Congress, the Roger Stones, the Ginny Thomases, and get Donald Trump held accountable for the things he says, then we will quiet these people and things will get easier in this country. Old Soul, and to the other people of color, I'm sorry you have to struggle with the things that are out there in terms of the racism. But I admire all of you to be as successful and powerful as you are in spite of that shit. I don't know that I would be that strong to do it. So I respect what you're going through, and I respect what you have accomplished in the process of going through that. All right. We've got this war. Hamas attacks Israel, which I thought was strange because Israel is very powerful and they are probably going to decimate Hamas. But in the process, they're probably going to kill and injure many innocent Palestinian people. Here's what you have to understand about Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They act as if they represent the Palestinians, but from what I can tell, they really don't. They're in it for themselves. So there's a lot of innocent people that will suffer just because these people took the actions they did. The whole thing is a very confusing situation for an old white guy in the United States. That's why I don't delve into it too much. If you side with one side, people will be mad with you. If you side with another side, other people will be mad at you. And as I said before, I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't know enough about it, and I'm not going to take a side. I presume both sides have legitimate complaints. I also know that this has been going on for decades and decades. This is the fifth war between these two factions in 15 years. So this isn't new. It's just the level that Hamas mounted is unusual. It's unprecedented. It's interesting. Initially, when this happened, I made the suggestion that Donald Trump, with his classified documents, may be responsible for what is going on in this war. And there were a lot of people, they didn't come after me personally, but other people started talking about it. And some of these people kind of admonished people for saying that, suggesting that it was a conspiracy theory. Even left side creators said that. Oh, I hate conspiracy theories, whether they're on the Democratic or Republican side. One guy even said, I guarantee you Donald Trump was not involved with this. That's a lie. And to that, I say, well, that's absolute bullshit. They suggested it's a conspiracy theory. And I say, that's bullshit. Apparently, we have a different idea of the definition of a conspiracy theory. To me, a conspiracy theory is something somebody pulls out of their ass to push along their agenda. They double and they triple it down and they try to shove it down your throat, even though there's no basis in truth. Now, what I suggested about Donald Trump maybe being responsible for providing military information from Israel to Russia, who in turn sent it to Iran, who in turn sent it to Hamas, is not conspiracy theory, because there is some evidence, or certainly some things to make you question it, certainly make it worth investigating. I told this story before. I'm going to tell it one more time because a lot of people are forgetting about it. These people will say that Donald Trump had any involvement in this and did not give documents to the Russians. Well, that is categorically untrue. We know for a fact that Donald Trump gave classified military documents to Russia. And how do we know this? We know this because Donald Trump had a meeting in the Oval Office shortly after he was inaugurated. Two of these Russian, I don't know what you call them, Russian dignitaries. That's not a good word because they're not dignified. But anyway, he had two of them in there that were presumed to be Russian spies. Now, sure, you'll say, well, yeah, how do you know he did anything? Well, here's how I know he did something. Because in that meeting afterwards, it was reported that Donald Trump, because he's new and didn't know any better, inadvertently gave Russian spies military information. And here's the kicker. We wanted to know what kind of information he gave them. And it was reported that he gave them Israeli military information. We also know that they spoke to the leaders in Israel and said, are you mad at Donald Trump? Are you worried about this? And at that time, we didn't know how unscrupulous Donald Trump was. I mean, we knew he was unscrupulous, but we had no idea how much. And Israel said, no, we have complete trust in the American government, which is what they would say. Well, 6 years later, this happens. Now, even if that wasn't the instance where Donald Trump gave the Israeli information that caused this situation, we know that from that point, all through his presidency, he was showing classified documents to all kinds of people. Then we know he took those classified documents to Mar-a-Lago in box after box, and they sat there. We also know that Russian spies regularly get into Mar-a-Lago looking for such things. So I don't know when Donald Trump got it to him, but I feel pretty confident that he did. Hamas would not be able to mount the attack they did without some fucking help. And I'm convinced Donald Trump had something to do with it. So for those people who claim that I'm spewing a conspiracy theory, no, I'm looking at facts. I'm trying to be pragmatic about this. I'm trying to look at the facts and try to figure out what happened. That's what happens in investigations. You have theories and you follow them up. Given this circumstance, I would hope that this is enough of a circumstantial evidence to cause people to investigate it and just verify whether it's true or not. You can say what you want, not a fucking conspiracy theory. Don't put me in the same position of people claiming that election fraud when it never happened and there's no evidence of it. Don't put me in that category because it's bullshit. If I say this, it's because of things I see, things I understand that are factual and that are the truth. And then you kind of look at it and you decide, what does this mean? And for my money, when I know the facts, it tells me that likely Donald Trump had something to do with it. Now, in Washington, D.C., President Joe Biden passionately condemned Hamas terrorist attacks in remarks Tuesday from the White House, 3 days after Hamas fighters launched a surprise attack on Israel, creating an all-out war between the two sides. Biden said, "In this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel." Now, in his 10-minute address, Biden voiced revulsion over the vicious attacks, which he said led to 1,000 Israeli and at least 14 American deaths. There are moments in this life when pure, unadulterated evil is unleashed on the world, Biden said, with Vice President Kamala Harris and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken standing behind him. The people of Israel lived through one such moment this weekend. Now, Biden disclosed for the first time that Americans are among those taken hostage by Hamas fighters. He did not specify how many. A White House national security official said Tuesday that 20 Americans are unaccounted for after the attacks. Biden said he has directed U.S. officials to offer their expertise in assisting Israel's efforts to free the hostages. As president, I have no higher priority than the safety of Americans being held hostage around the world. Biden spoke with equal parts rage and resolve as he enumerated Hamas atrocities in carrying out their attacks. He said infants in their mother's arms, grandparents in wheelchairs, Holocaust survivors abducted and held hostage, hostages who Hamas has now threatened to execute in violation of every code of human morality. He said it's abhorrent. Now, Biden spoke after a phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. An open question is whether Biden will let Israel conduct the war as it deems necessary or urge restraint if civilian casualties in the Gaza Strip pile up. He did not clarify whether Israel should observe any limits in rooting out Hamas fighters. He took no questions after he finished speaking. And from what it sounds like, Israel has taken off any restrictions. They're pissed. Their people are getting killed for no reason. And as I said, you piss off Israel, they're a pretty formidable force. They're going to go after Hamas. They can beat Hamas very easily, I believe. But it's the collateral damage we have to worry about. The citizens of the Gaza Strip that are completely innocent will be caught up in this war, either killed by Hamas, who doesn't seem to have any reason not to stop doing it, or whether it's hit by friendly fire from Israel. Innocent people are going to die. There's no question about it. Absolutely no question about it. This is a tough situation for Joe Biden. He's got to decide what to do. And we need the House of Representatives to come up with something, come up with aid or decisions. And as I told you before, as long as we don't have a Speaker of the House, they can't do that. That's why as they get back together today and try to elect another Speaker of the House, they are going to be frantic and panicked about this. This is the last thing they needed. They could play this out if this didn't happen and run it till the last day before the budget is to be decided and a possible shutdown occurs. Not anymore. Civilians are dying every day. The Republicans need to act as quickly as possible, and unfortunately, they need to get a Speaker of the House to do that. And right at this point, short of getting help from the Democrats, they have no clear path to getting it done. Now, Biden is expected to face competing pressures within and outside the Democratic Party that could make it more difficult to keep his pledge to provide support for Israel's plans to defend the country. Biden also made a passing reference to the dysfunction in Washington. He said the House has no speaker because of infighting among the majority Republican Party. When Congress returns to work, he said he will ask members to take urgent actions to fund the national security requirements of our critical partners. This is not about party or politics, he said. It's about the security of the world. And he's absolutely correct about that. Question is, are the Republicans able to comprehend that? Are they willing to do something? Because we know the standard practice for Republicans is to do nothing. But they've got a problem. If they do nothing in this situation, they will be decimated. They will be blamed. So they love to play these games, these performative games. But now they actually have to hunker down and fucking do something. Question is, will they? We'll start to see where they're headed today. All right, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. Even though Donald Trump took his dirty diaper and went home, the Letitia James lawsuit against him in New York continues. It's still going on. You don't hear about it as much because there's no video of Donald Trump in court or anything like that. But yesterday was kind of a telling day. They had a witness testify who pretty damning to Donald Trump. His name is Alan Weisselberg. He was the CFO of the Trump Organization. He was convicted of tax fraud. The Trump Organization had 17 convictions of fraud. So Weisselberg shows up to testify in this lawsuit against Donald Trump. Now, you might expect that he'd plead the fifth, which is a dumb thing to do in a lawsuit. That doesn't help you at all. But he spent 4 or 5 months in Rikers Island prison. He got a dose of reality. He's a 75-year-old man on Rikers Island, and that's got to shake some sense loose in your head. And he did talk at this lawsuit. I think he was forced to talk and tell the truth, coerced, if you will, because he didn't want to go back to jail. Now, the interesting thing about this case, he is also one of the defendants in this case. He's one of the people that are going to be sued in this case. But what choice did he have other than to speak the truth? Now, the Manhattan trial continued Tuesday. Alan Weisselberg testified, and he confessed that he approved company financial documents so that Donald Trump would not default on loans. ABC News, which is a running blog update of the trial, cited the moment revealing that it was he and not Trump who approved loan documents that grossly exaggerated assets. Certifying Trump's financial statements were true, correct, and complete, Weisselberg said he signed them. He's admitting to a crime he's already been convicted of. But he's also stating that Donald Trump committed these crimes. Remember, this isn't a criminal case, but it is going to take him for all he's got. And a criminal case may follow up after this lawsuit. I'm convinced that might be a possibility. Now, evidence showed something that said, please see the attached report required per our loan documents or the above reference loan. Someone with the Trump Organization wrote to banks like Wells Fargo. The employee would then put in a certificate swearing to the accuracy signed by Weisselberg. They said, did you understand that if you failed to provide this, the Trump organization would be in breach of its obligations under the loan agreement? She held up some of the emails and asked the question over and over. Finally, Weisselberg confessed. He also said that regarding Donald Trump claiming his apartment was 30,000 square feet, which in fact it was 10,000 square feet. He was asked, did you know that what was being claimed being 30,000 square feet as opposed to the real 10,000 square feet? Did you know that was happening? Did you know that was wrong? And Alan Weisselberg acknowledged, yeah, I knew it was wrong. People always ask me, and I've asked the question too, why do people who are presumably intelligent continue to break the law for Donald Trump, who continue to suck up for Donald Trump? In the podcast I did with Jace, I explained this. Having grown up with a father who was a narcissistic, sociopathic, pathological liar, they are quick to anger and they are particularly aggressive in their anger. And most people in this world are averse to confrontation. So Donald Trump would lose his shit, say incredibly horrible things, threaten people's lives, threaten people's jobs. And you come to a point after you experience something like that, at least I did when I was a young child with my father, you would do absolutely anything to avoid that kind of attack by this narcissist. So as I've told you before, I would find ways to get him out of that mindset into something else, or I just do what he asked, whether it was a good idea or not a good idea, just so I didn't have to deal with the wrath of my father. And I think to a large extent, that's what we're seeing with those people around Donald Trump. Donald Trump's known to lose his shit, get unhinged, yell and scream and make threats and do all that sort of stuff. Even though these aren't his children, they are his underlings, his employees. He holds authority over them, or at least they feel like he does, and they will do anything to avoid the wrath of Donald Trump. Apparently, they will even commit crimes to avoid the wrath of Donald Trump. It's an illness. I mean, I don't know if it's a neurosis or psychosis or whatever it is, but it is mental. And Donald Trump uses his situation and his power to be a bully. That is the true essence of narcissists. They are fucking bullies. And until somebody stands up to a bully, they will continue to bully. That's why things are changing now that he's going to court and having to deal with judges or prosecutors that he has no control over. He's never experienced this before. This is totally new to him. This is why he's freaking out. Now, here's an interesting story. According to new court filings released on Tuesday, Fani Willis wants Alex Jones and Ronna McDaniel to testify in the Georgia case concerning Donald Trump. That's interesting. Ronna McDaniel is the head of the RNC, and Alex Jones is some goofy conspiracy theorist who's now fucking broke. But Fani wants to talk to them. Now, I'm guessing they're not going to be real easy to get in the chair. They're going to try to get out of it. But if I was to bet against Fani Willis and Alex Jones and Ronna McDaniel were my choices, they don't have a fucking prayer. They're going to be sitting in that chair being grilled by Fani Willis, and it's not going to go well. Now, there are many people in the Republican Party who were more than happy to aid Donald Trump in any way they could. But now, with so many cases against them and against the former president, there are judges who would like to hear from them. Two of those people, Jones and McDaniel. Here's the cool thing about it. All the Georgia cases are on television. They're all videotaped. Remember the videotapes we saw of Alex Jones when he was in his civil trial? This is going to be interesting. Ronna McDaniel, she'll just probably be evasive and stupid like she typically is. But excuse me, but Alex Jones is going to be hard pressed not to lose his shit. And that will be fucking hilarious and entertaining. Now, Ronna McDaniel will provide evidence to the jury of Kenneth Chesebro's involvement in the conspiracy, including without limitation as it relates to communication between co-defendants Donald Trump and John Eastman regarding the conspiracy to cause certain individuals to falsely hold themselves out as the duly elected and qualified presidential electors, the fake electors. Going to point out how these people were in the thick of it. Now, a different filing from Willis read, Alex Jones will provide evidence to the jury of Kenneth Chesebro's involvement in the conspiracy, including without limitation as it relates to his participation in the march on the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. And see, Chesebro was there. We don't know what he did, but he's also the architect for this whole fake elector thing too. So Ken's in trouble. And people like Alex Jones and Ronna McDaniel, they're going to want to save their asses. And they're going to talk. Alex Jones is not having a good year. Of course, he lost the major lawsuit by the parents of Sandy Hook victims. McDaniel has also been a strong supporter of the former president, despite his refusal to show up for her RNC debates. She might be a little angry at him at this point. It wouldn't surprise me. Now, there's something else interesting. Excuse the coffee. I don't have a cold or anything. I'm old and my throat gets dry. That's why I got the water. It used to be I could talk for 3 hours and not take a drink of anything. But those were the good old days when I was a young man and had a future. Now I'm an old man and my future is, well, questionable. Anyway, you remember U.S. Representative George Santos and how badly things are going on for him, in spite of the fact that he's still in the House of Representatives and they just embrace him no matter how criminal and how corrupt he is. Well, something happened to George Santos yesterday and didn't make his life any easier. We know that he had been indicted and charged with 13 felonies. How could it get worse than that? Well, it did yesterday because he was indicted again from the DOJ and charged with 10 more felonies. So Mr. George Santos has 23 felony charges. Now, how do you think he's going to do with that? George is going to motherfucking jail. Now, they're saying that George Santos stole identities of donors to his campaign and then used their credit cards to ring up tens of thousands of dollars in unauthorized charges, according to a new indictment filed Tuesday. Can you imagine that? I'm running for the representative of New York. Send your money to me. And then getting their money wasn't enough. Then he had to steal their credit cards too. How in the world did he ever imagine that he wouldn't get caught with this or that somebody wouldn't complain about it? This is the epitome of arrogance or of a mental illness. And I tend to mental illness at this point. He then wired some of the money to his own personal bank account, prosecutors said, while using the rest to inflate his campaign coffers. The 23-count indictment replaces one filed in May against the New York Republican, charging him with embezzling money from his campaign and lying to Congress about his wealth, among other offenses. Well, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? I mean, it worked for Donald Trump. Maybe George said, I'll just emulate Donald Trump and I'll be fine. Now, neither of those motherfuckers is fine. Now, the updated indictment, prosecutors accused Santos of charging more than $44,000 to his campaign over a period of months using cards belonging to contributors without their knowledge. In one case, just one case, he charged $12,000 to a contributor's credit card and transferred the vast majority of that money into his personal bank account. George, you didn't think they'd notice? For fuck's sake. Santos is also accused of falsely reporting to the Federal Elections Commission that he had loaned his campaign $500,000 when he actually hadn't given anything and had less than $8,000 in the bank. The fake loan was an attempt to convince Republican Party officials that he was a serious candidate, worth their financial support, the indictment said. It's all smoke and mirrors, a shell game, if you will. The funny fucking thing about it is the Republicans fell for it. Don't you vet people anymore? Now, as alleged, Santos is charged with stealing people's identity, making charges of his own on his own donors' credit cards without authorization, lying to the FEC and by extension the public about the financial state of his campaign. So Santos came out of a 2-hour Republican conference at the U.S. Capitol and told reporters he had no comment on the superseding indictment. Well, no, of course you don't. I was in conference like everyone else without my phone, so I have nothing to say, he said. He has previously maintained his innocence, claiming he is a victim of a witch hunt. Why is every investigation of a Republican a witch hunt? In spite of the fact that there's evidence and witnesses to the contrary. Now, the new charge is deep in the legal peril for Santos, who likely faces lengthy prison time if convicted, and he will be convicted. So far, he has resisted all calls to resign, insisting he intends to run for re-election next year. Now, there's something else. I just heard, I don't think it's a rumor, I think it's true because this sounds like George Santos. I'm hearing he's throwing his hat in the ring to be Speaker of the House. Oh, wouldn't that be perfect? They voted in George Santos to be Speaker of the House. I mean, the Republican Party is full of frauds anyway. You might as well make the whole fucking caucus in the House fraudulent. It pretty much is anyway. Well, why not? Why not put that fucker in charge? Now, he was initially arrested in May on a 13-count federal indictment, which charged him with using funds earmarked for campaign expenses on designer clothes and other personal expenses and improperly obtaining unemployment benefits meant for Americans who lost work because of the pandemic. Now, of course, he's free on bail, waiting trial. Santos has described his litany of lies as victimless embellishments. Yeah, that's what they were. You take people's credit cards, you steal from their credit cards, and then you tell me there's no victims. Please explain. Last week, a longtime Long Island political bookkeeper pled guilty to fraud conspiracy charge, telling the judge she helped her former boss hoodwink prospective donors and Republican Party officials by submitting bogus campaign finance reports. So just like Donald Trump, his own employee threw him under the bus, mainly because what she said was true. Now, the new indictment alleges a multi-part fraud by Santos, who allegedly duped both his donors and his family members. In one instance, Santos allegedly swiped the credit card information of one of his contributors who had already donated $5,800 to the campaign. He gave himself an additional $15,800 in payments, the indictment said, because the unauthorized charges exceeded contribution limits under federal law. Santos listed the additional payments as coming from his own unwitting relatives. Jesus Christ. He's stupid, he's criminal, and he's fucking greedy. Can you imagine? Oh, for fuck's sake. Now, of course, today the House is back in session after taking a week off for God knows what. They kick Kevin McCarthy out of his position and then they go on vacation. And then we'll start things up on Wednesday of next week, which is today. And now they've got to hustle. They've got to hustle quick, fast, and in a hurry to get a Speaker of the House. And at this point, it doesn't look too good for him. Now, House Republicans met last night, to discuss possible rule changes to prevent a repeat of the January process that required 15 rounds of voting to elect Kevin McCarthy Speaker. Trying to fix things so they can get this done fast. Republican lawmakers returned Tuesday evening to hear from the candidates hoping to replace McCarthy. Right now, two GOP representatives have formally entered the race, Steve Scalise of Louisiana and Jim Jordan of Ohio. Neither one is a good candidate. Neither one is going to win. Now, Democrats also met yesterday and are expected to unanimously back Hakeem Jeffries of New York, a formality because the Democrats lack the votes to pick the Speaker. The race was triggered when Matt Gaetz, of course, made the motion to vacate and Kevin was kicked out. Gaetz said he isn't ruling out supporting Scalise or Jordan. I remain undecided. I bet you do, until you can figure what you can grift out of these fucks. He told reporters in Capitol, I'm praying about it tonight. Yeah, motherfucker, you better be praying to have somebody save your soul because you are the lowest of the low. Now, at a meeting with Florida's GOP congressional delegation, Gaetz said, I enjoyed the discussion with leaders Scalise and with Chairman Jordan. They answered questions that were really keen to the minds of Floridians about offshore drilling, about immigration, about our agricultural policies, and about our unique Medicare and Medicaid populations in Florida. Gaetz said that once it's clear which one of the two candidates has the most support, I think there's going to be, a tremendous amount of pressure to coalesce around that candidate. Yeah, maybe. But are you going to get the moderates in the Republican Party to vote for Jim Jordan or Scalise for that matter? I don't think so. Whoever's going to get elected to the Speaker of the House is going to need help from the Democrats. And at this point, they offer nothing to interest the Democrats. Now, Special Counsel Jack Smith signaled that prosecutors know former President Donald Trump's motive for failing to relinquish a cache of classified documents before leaving the White House for Mar-a-Lago. That's interesting. He has a motive. Now, was that motive just ego and arrogance? Was that intending to sell it to other foreign countries? We don't know. They don't say what the motive was, but Jack Smith claims he knows and he has the proof. And where there's a motive and where there's proof of that motive, there's a conviction. Now, the quote goes like this, that the classified materials at issue in this case were taken from the White House and retained at Mar-a-Lago is not in dispute. What is in dispute is how that occurred, why it occurred, what Trump knew, and what Trump intended in retaining them. All issues that the government will prove at trial, primarily with unclassified evidence. That came out in the motion that Jack Smith issued yesterday. Now, it appears that the government is not only prepared to prove the how and the why they went into the paper hoarding, but also what Trump knew and intended to do with them by retaining the precious documents. That's bad news for Donald Trump. If they know, he's fucked. And let's be honest, even before this, he was fucked. Jack Smith is doing what Jack Smith does, you know? He's very meticulous about this shit. He gets all his ducks in a row, and then he starts to take people down. The second worst thing to happen to Donald Trump is Jack Smith being the prosecutor in his case. The first bad thing to happen to Donald Trump, the first worst thing to happen to Donald Trump, is the day he won the presidency. And I'll bet you right now he's thinking to himself that I should have never done that. I could have lived my life under the radar and just lived out my last days in luxury. Now he's looking at living out his last days in fucking jail. Now, Washington Post writer Aaron Blake took quick notice of Smith's efforts in the filed motion to publicly expose Trump's intent come trial. Indeed, establishing a motive would seem to drive home the intention of Trump's actions and combat any arguments that this was all a misunderstanding or that Trump somehow didn't know what he had done. This doesn't look good for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is going to be in serious trouble in this court case. I know he got to walk out after 2.5 days from the lawsuit. He ain't going to have that option in the criminal trials. He's going to have to be there. He's going to have to listen to the evidence and the witnesses, most of which he knows or worked for him or were family members. He's going to have to sit there and listen to it. And Donald Trump won't know what to do with himself. He's used to controlling the situation. And at this point, he has no control over fucking anything, not even the polls. He's sinking in the polls. We're watching the slow demise of Donald Trump, so savor it. And we can all cheer and be glad when the crash finally occurs. Now, there was something I was looking forward to yesterday, and I got to be honest, I was disappointed by it. Ron DeSantis was going to be interviewed on Morning Joe. Joe Scarborough was going to interview him. Now, I do watch MSNBC. I'm not a big fan of Joe Scarborough. He's a Republican at heart, and he just comes off arrogant, doesn't know when to shut up. He's always talking over guests. He's always talking over co-hosts. And it's just an arrogance that is palpable when you watch it. Now, I was really hoping that Joe would corner Ron DeSantis when he came on the show. Question is, why would Ron DeSantis go on MSNBC? Because that motherfucker's desperate. He looks like a goof. And he wanted to improve his image to some Democrats who might be crazy enough to vote for him. Now, the Florida governor and 2024 Republican presidential candidate made a rare appearance outside the normal conservative media, and he talked to Joe Scarborough during a brief interview that focused primarily on Hamas attack and Israel. And to me, that's a mistake. Granted, that is the big story today, but the real important story is who DeSantis is and how damaging he's been to his state. And he should be questioned about the overturning Roe v. Wade and the 6-week abortion ban and his racist tendencies and the looseness with guns. But I was disappointed. They had an opportunity to nail Ron DeSantis and put him in a corner and make him answer, but they didn't do it. Now, they do talk about this, though. DeSantis tried to deliver a campaign message shortly before the program ended. Of course he did. You said, going forward as Republicans, my argument has been very simple, DeSantis said. If the election is about Joe Biden's failures and our positive vision for the future, which it would be if I was the candidate, we will win. Well, what are Joe Biden's failures? See, that's the thing. You just make them up. They don't really exist. He goes on to say, if it is about what piece of paper or document was left at the toilet at Mar-a-Lago or all of these other things in January 6th, If that's what the election is going to be about, it's going to allow Biden to be in his basement, and they're going to be able to do it again. Now, it goes on to say, just a question for Republicans about what you want to be talking about. Now, of course, you don't want to be talking about classified documents, but don't you think it's important enough to talk about it? You'd rather push that aside and act as if nothing happened. Well, I'm sorry. This is devastating and damaging to our country. It needs to be addressed, and it needs to be prosecuted, and there needs to be accountability. Now, when Ron DeSantis said this, that left an opening for Scarborough to ask his opinion on Trump's indictment on 40 counts in federal court for retaining classified documents and stashing them in the bathroom and other areas on his beach resort. You talk about the toilet as something that really brings up an issue I wasn't going to bring up. Well, why not, Joe? Isn't that a fucking important issue? Let me ask you really quickly, were you about to run out of time? Should Americans be concerned? Are you concerned by the fact that President Trump revealed war plans to evade Iran military attacks against Iran to people that didn't have classified ability to see those documents? DeSantis, like most of the former president's Republican challengers, has only indirectly criticized Trump's alleged crimes, which have resulted in 4 indictments and 91 charges. And this is what Ron said. Well, look, I think it's an allegation. It remains to be seen, DeSantis said. Obviously, if it is proven, that would be a difficult thing. I would note, I think this is why a lot of Republicans are concerned about some of these cases, and that it is being attacked for years as being in collusion with Russia, and that was not accurate. Really, Ron? You want to sit back and wait for Donald Trump because he hasn't been convicted yet. Yet you want to call out for Joe Biden with ridiculous shit that doesn't even exist. Sorry, Ron, your credibility is fucking falling short with me. He goes on to say that was a false narrative that was created, and so I would be remiss if I dove in and accepted all those things. I think he has his day in court. I think he's innocent until proven guilty. The reality is we're dealing with the situation, and if the elections is a referendum on all the other issues, and we're not talking about inflation and interest rates and the border and crime, then that gives Democrats a huge advantage to try to retain power. Now, Scarborough asked whether the election becoming a referendum on Trump rather than the current president would be bad news for Republicans. He said, I think referendum on Joe Biden means we win, DeSantis said. If I'm the candidate, I think referendum on Donald Trump. If that's it, then I think the Democrats would win. There are millions of voters out there who don't like what Biden is doing. Think the country is in the wrong direction, going in the wrong direction. They want to vote for a Republican. But once it is Donald Trump, that's a deal breaker for them. You want to give Donald Trump credit for not having been convicted yet. You don't want to talk out of school. You don't want to pick on Donald Trump because he hasn't been prosecuted yet. Yet you're willing to prosecute Joe Biden for things that never even fucking happened without a court case, without evidence, without witnesses. See, this is where my disappointment is. Why doesn't Joe Scarborough ask those questions? I know if I was sitting in front of him, I would. Is Joe Scarborough worried about being confrontational on the show? Why have the motherfucker on if you're not going to be confrontational? This guy is a criminal in his own right. He's abhorrent. He's racist. He's misogynistic. He's anti-Semitic. He's pro-guns to anybody who fucking wants them. He has instituted a 6-week abortion ban. Why aren't we talking about that shit? It's real easy to say, oh, what do you think about Israel and Hamas? Well, everybody thinks it's fucking horrible. But most people think that what Ron DeSantis did was fucking horrible. Why not talk about that? This is exactly what I hate about the media. They don't do their fucking job. They throw up softballs and they try to act clever, and they don't do the job. I will tell you this, if Mehdi Hassan had been handling that interview, it would have gone very differently. It would have gone the right way. We need to expose these people for who they are. So when people go to the voting booths, they know what they're voting for instead of the bullshit that Republicans and our media troll out for us to listen to. Now, there are smart people like you and me that won't buy this shit. We know better. But as Ron DeSantis said, there may be millions that are dumb enough to listen to the bullshit and buy into the bullshit. They've done it for 7 years. Why would they not do it in this case? It pisses me off about MSNBC. You would hope they'd be better than that. At the very least, put a better interviewer there in front of Ron DeSantis, not Joe Scarborough, who at heart is a fucking Republican and apparently doesn't have the balls to call somebody out who needs to be called out. Complete disappointment, complete joke, and I'm not surprised. This is the way we get things done in our media. This is why we all are informed differently, and this is why we are a divided country. So fuck the media. I'm disappointed every time they do something, unless it's Mehdi Hassan. I hate to just pick him out, but he's the only one I've ever seen do the job of a true investigative journalist. Joe Scarborough is just a politician who's doing a talk show. That's all he is. And he approved it yesterday when he interviewed Ron DeSantis. All right, we are going to wrap up the Rational Boomer podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope you have a great day, and we will talk to you again tomorrow.